All right, so we got yet another story here of the Democratic establishment rallying behind super PAC money in order to try to defeat progressives within Congress. So we're going to get into some of the details here regarding this specific super PAC, which is being championed by Bakari Sellers right here. But honestly, this is just playing into the same overall lesson that progressives in Congress refuse to learn, and that is that no matter how much you try to cozy up to Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or the rest of the ghouls within the Democratic Party, they are never going to return the favor. They are never going to return that loyalty. And obviously, we have another case example here in terms of how delusional that mindset really is, and how much progressives within Congress, inside and out, those that are incumbents and those that are potentially insurgents, whether it's Nina Turner or whether it's Jessica Cisneros down in Texas, that you have to go to war with the Democratic Party establishment, or they're just going to continue unilaterally fucking you over on repeat. So some of the details here from Politico, they say, scoop, PAC to spend over $1 million to oust squad member Rashida Tlaib. So they say a new PAC endorsed by Bakari Sellers, who is a former South Carolina politician. Now he's doing some lobbying for foreign governments. He's also obviously leading the charge on some of these PAC money projects, as well as being a sometime regular commentator on corporate media outlets. But they say that it's a PAC that is endorsed by Bakari Sellers, and it's saying that it's going to spend upwards of $1 million to support one of the candidates trying to unseat progressive firebrand Rashida Tlaib. So honestly, keep in mind, Nancy Pelosi going down, doing those robocalls, fundraising and campaigning on behalf of the most conservative member within her caucus, Henry Cuellar down in Texas, again, against that progressive challenger, Jessica Cisneros, and contrast that with the amount of support that we can expect that Rashida Tlaib is going to be getting from the Democratic establishment, even though she is also an incumbent. But they continue here saying the stated mission of the group, which is called Urban Empowerment Action PAC, is set to back candidates who are, quote, dedicated to the educational empowerment and economic uplift of black communities, something that Rashida Tlaib famously does not support, I guess, is the message that they're trying to put across here. And they say, according to a release first shared with Politico's The Recast, and they say the PAC adds that its support of Janice Winfrey, who is the insurgent candidate here, the Detroit city clerk, is meant to boost her campaign to restore infrastructure, improve educational opportunities in the district, and support the Biden-Harris agenda in D.C. And they say the group is made up of a coalition of black and Jewish business leaders. I think the Israeli PACs are also going to be lining up against Rashida Tlaib, obviously the only Palestinian-American member of Congress who has been pretty, at least comparatively, relentlessly fighting for Palestinian rights and to hold Israel accountable for their violent ethnic cleansing and apartheid of the Palestinian people. So you're going to have, super PACs like AIPAC coming in to rally around Janice Winfrey against Rashida Tlaib, obviously. But they continue here saying, for her part, Tlaib has been unequivocal in her disdain for Israel and its treatment of Palestinians and this week introduced a resolution in the House to recognize the Palestinian Nakba, a term for describing the displacement of Palestinians ahead of the 1948 establishment of Israel. This description that they give here from Politico is obviously whitewashing what the Nakba actually means to the Palestinian people. It translates roughly in Arabic to the catastrophe, basically pointing out the hundreds of thousands, I think it was minimum like 700,000 Palestinians who were either killed or forcibly displaced from their land as a part of the Nakba and the establishment of Israel. So, any legislation calling for just a recognition of that event seems like it would be the bare minimum that you could do in a situation like this. But they continue saying Tlaib, one of the most liberal and outspoken members of the House Democratic Caucus, has also been a persistent critic of President Joe Biden, delivering her own rebuttal to his State of the Union address in March. She was also a no vote on the Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed into law at the end of last year. And they do give a little bit of context in this, albeit not nearly enough, saying that the two-term congresswoman said that she voted against it because Democrats were reneging on a promise to pass the legislation alongside an expansive climate and social spending bill, commonly referred to as Build Back Better. And by separating the two, she argued progressives lost their leverage, and to date, Build Back Better remains stalled. So, in other words, she and the other very few, I think it was 6 members of the squad who voted against the bipartisan infrastructure framework, they were 100% correct because, again, I've said this a million times on this channel, so I won't spend too much time on it, but just as a very rudimentary reminder of exactly how that played out, you had the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which was really just a corporate slush fund after Republicans got their hands on it. It was a slush fund for corporate America, isn't even going to fractionally address the issue of our crumbling infrastructure in this country, but nonetheless, the plan was to keep those two bills attached, Build Back Better with the bipartisan infrastructure framework, and basically the idea of keeping those intact, which was supported by Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden originally. The plan was keep those intact because you know that once the bipartisan watered down infrastructure bill is passed, that, corporate ghouls like Manchin and Sinema and Gottenheimer in the House, they are never going to support Build Back Better once you gave up that leverage, and they were, again, proven 100% to be correct because Build Back Better is entirely dead right now at the hands of those same corporate Democrats who were insisting at the time that they could be trusted to engage in good faith negotiations. Clearly, they were proven correct on that, and so, this isn't a critique of Rashida Tlaib in this case and saying that she's, somehow against the Biden agenda. No, she was more so in favor of the Biden agenda than basically any other member of Congress because she wanted to pass both of his two big flagship social spending bills, not just one of them. So, again, she's fighting for the Biden agenda more than anybody else, but they're going to try to portray that as if she was against the Biden agenda somehow, but they continue saying Sellers, the television pundit who is a former South Carolina state representative, is fundraising for the PAC, and he says he wants to see the size of the Congressional Black Caucus increase in the next Congress, and explains the PAC's endorsement of Winfrey this way, saying, quote, "We are hoping that we can have a candidate that doesn't have varying distractions." What the fuck does that even mean? Varying distractions? I mean, again, basically pointing out that she does like to focus on other issues like relating to Israel and Palestine, or I guess just basically the fact that she pushes back against the corruption within the Democratic establishment, even in mild ways. That's enough for her to be, I guess, portrayed as some sort of an outside distractor or something like that. Completely ridiculous, but that's the justification that he said. Basically, he's saying that he thinks that this other candidate, Winfrey, will be more in line with the corporate wing of the Democratic Party and isn't going to be causing much of a stir on their legislative priorities. But they continue saying Winfrey is black while Tlaib is Palestinian American, and they say when asked to comment on UEA's endorsement, Denzel McCampbell, a spokesperson for Tlaib's re-election campaign, said the representative is battle-tested, and he called on Winfrey to disavow the PAC's spending. Highly doubt that she's going to do that, but he said outsider super PAC ads do not win elections. Unfortunately, doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. We saw this with Nina Turner. We saw this with Jessica Cisneros. That outside money does have a big impact in these elections, but he says direct voter contact does. So hopefully the on-the-ground organizing is enough to overcome this money. But again, we've seen the case study examples on this and how impactful this money can actually be. But he continued saying, if our opponent truly does care about our democracy, I hope that she will immediately disavow and condemn this type of big money attack on our democracy that only seeks to mislead voters and distort reality. So, I mean, listen, he's 100% correct in terms of how he's identifying a lot of where this money is going. We saw this again with all of these other recent elections where basically a lot of these PACs, they'll come out and they'll say, we're in favor of, in this case, increasing black representation in Congress, leaning on these identity issues in order to distract from the fact that this candidate they're pushing would just be in line with corporate America. Or in the case of a entity like APAC and their various super PACs that they are funneling money into, they'll say we are in support of pro-Israel candidates, but then you go and you look at the actual attack ads that they're running, and they have nothing to do with Israel. They have everything to do with disingenuous bullshit attacks that are misportraying or basically are disinformation in terms of what these more progressive members of the squad actually represent and what they've been fighting for. So we've covered all of the ads on this channel before, but this is nothing new. We know exactly what this money is going to be used for, and we know that the Democratic establishment clearly has no problem with targeting progressives, no matter what, no matter how much they try to cozy up to the Democratic establishment. Again, that favor is never going to be returned. They are never going to be rewarded for their loyalty, and we've seen this again with multiple different case studies just recently, but this was another one that I didn't get to cover on this channel. Kind of might want to do a video on this to go more into detail, but basically you had the head of the DCCC, which is one of the Democrats' main fundraising arms, this guy, Sean Maloney, basically because of the way that they did the horrible redistricting up in New York, he had a couple choices in terms of the districts that he could go and run in, and he basically chose to take the easier route, even though he comes out and pretends like he is one of the moderate centrist Democrats whose political philosophy can appeal to independents and Republicans. He basically decided to go the easier route, leave his previous district, or what encompassed the majority of his previous district, and is now going to be, it looks like, going into either Mondaire Jones or Jamal Bowman's district in order to try to basically jack those constituents from them to get an easier race. So again, just one small example in a whole host of examples that we've had recently that indicate that the Democratic establishment has absolutely no problem whatsoever with targeting progressives, whether they're incumbents or whether they're insurgent candidates who would better represent their constituencies if they were able to overcome the PAC money and the corruption that exists within the Democratic establishment right now. But again, contrast this with what the progressives in Congress have been doing. I mean, it's basically completely pathetic. They're giving in to every single thing that Nancy Pelosi wants, whether you're talking about, Pramila Jayapal leading the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She was one of the main figures who allowed Build Back Better and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework to get detached, to the complete collapse of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Also the endorsement of Shontel Brown, Nina Turner's opponent, from the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Clearly, they have absolutely no coherent strategy whatsoever in order to engage in a war with the Democratic establishment, which is exactly what they need to do. And it seems like they're willing to let the corporate wing of the Democratic Party basically just curb stomp them all the way through, while they refuse to form a cohesive bloc or to form a collective unit in order to force some of our progressive priorities through Congress, or to even support other members that are progressive insurgents in a lot of these races. I mean, we saw this with Nina Turner, where AOC was the only member of the squad effectively who endorsed Nina Turner, and even she only did it like a day before the election. So, the solidarity among the leftists in Congress is absolutely pathetic at this point, and the solidarity amongst the representatives who represent corporate America seems to be stronger than ever.